In part 1, we followed the crime of knowledge. In part 2, we watched the flood reset. In part 3, we stepped into divine politics, jealousy, worship, and control. In part 4, we traced what systems do to awakeners, labeled them, scapegoat them, removed them. In part 5, we walked into the darkest currency of devotion, sacrifice, and what happens when innocence is put on the altar. Tonight, we go to the place where fear becomes permanent, the underworld. Because if you can control someone's idea of death, you can control their entire life. We're going to hold two worlds side by side, Hades and hell, not as a gotcha, not as a debate club, as architecture, because both traditions build invisible prisons in the mind and then call them justice. Let's start in Greece. When people say Hades, they usually mean one of two things, the god or the realm. Either way, the Greek underworld isn't a cartoon furnace. It's more like a system, a place with structure. There are regions, rules, judges, consequences. It's not random, it's bureaucratic. Most souls don't go to an eternal torture chamber. Most go to a shadow existence, a dim continuation of being. Not bliss, not flames, more like an echo. Then there are exceptions. There's Tartarus, where the worst offenders are punished. There's Elysium, where heroes and the favored get rest. There are rivers with meanings attached to them. Forgetfulness, sorrow, boundary, and oath. Greek myth does something interesting here. It doesn't pretend death is fair. It doesn't pretend the gods are always moral. But it does imply that the universe has categories, and your choices place you somewhere. It's a consequence with a map. Now pivot to the biblical world. If you grew up in modern church culture, you were likely handed a very specific image of hell. Fire, screaming, forever. A divine torture chamber for wrong beliefs, wrong behavior, wrong loyalty. But when you trace the language historically through the texts, you see something more complex. There's Sheol, the realm of the dead in Hebrew thought, often described as a grave-like shadow place. Not necessarily a torture theater. There's Gehenna, a word that becomes associated with judgment imagery. There's outer darkness and weeping and gnashing, lake of fire in later apocalyptic language. The point isn't to settle the theology in one episode. The point is to notice what happens. Over time, these images become a single superweapon in people's minds. And once the weapon exists, institutions learn how to use it. Because fear of death is primal. Fear of endless punishment is programmable. Here's the pattern, clean. Greek underworld fear says, the cosmos has consequences, don't disrespect the order. Religious hell. Fear often says agree, submit, believe correctly, or suffer forever. Those aren't the same message. One is about living within the boundaries of fate and the gods' rules. The other becomes an enforcement mechanism for loyalty. And this is where your real-life experience matters, because most people don't meet hell as an ancient literary concept. They meet it as a threat from a human mouth. Be careful. Don't question. Don't leave. Don't doubt you'll pay later. Hell becomes the ultimate gag order. Now let's talk about the psychology of it. If your system can punish you after you die, it can demand anything while you live. It can demand your silence, your obedience, your money, your identity, your relationships, even your ability to think freely. Because the threat is infinite, the leverage is infinite. And once you accept infinite leverage, you've accepted a moral trap. A trap where you can be forced to call fear love. So let's do the think tank thing and ask the question nobody wants to ask out loud. If God is love, why does love need a torture chamber to stay persuasive? If truth is truth, why does it need terror to hold people in place? Now defenders will say, hell is justice, God is holy, sin must be punished. Okay, but here's the follow-up that never goes away. Does punishment that never ends serve justice? Because justice implies proportion. Justice implies purpose. Justice implies the possibility of restoration or resolution. Endless punishment is not proportionate. It's not restoration. It's not correction. It's dominance. It says, the ruler's authority matters more than your humanity. And you can argue theology all day, but psychologically that's what it trains. It trains compliance. Now bring Greece back into the frame. In Greek myth, the gods can be cruel, but the stories don't usually require you to worship your way out of fear. The underworld is part of the cosmology. You live, you die, you go where your life places you, and the story moves on. But in fear-based religion, the afterlife becomes an advertisement, believe this or burn. And once belief becomes the ticket, the system can sell the ticket. Now here's where it gets even darker. Sometimes hell isn't only about controlling behavior, it's about controlling imagination. Because if you can convince people that the ultimate reality is an eternal prison, you can convince them that the present world is also a prison. You can make them tolerate injustice now, because they're afraid of consequences later. You can make them accept abuse now, because they're afraid of being rebellious. You can make them silence their own conscience, because they're afraid their own thoughts are sinful. And once that happens, fear becomes a god, not in name, in function. Now let's do our courtroom segment because part 6 demands it. Put hell on trial, not as a doctrine, but as a tool. Question 1. Who benefits when people fear eternal punishment? Not in theory, in practice. Who profits? Who gains authority? Who becomes untouchable? Question 2. What does it produce in the human mind? Does it produce love, courage, compassion, and honesty? Or does it produce anxiety, conformity, performance, and silence? Because a tree is known by its fruit, and fear-based systems tend to produce fear-based people, not free people. Now, to be fair, there are believers who reject the eternal torture model. Some read the imagery as symbolic. Some believe in annihilation. Some believe in eventual restoration. Some simply refuse to build faith on terror. And that matters because it shows you something important. Even inside these traditions, the fight is not always God versus atheism. A lot of the time, the fight is love versus control, and that's the thread we've been pulling all season. So here's the pattern tonight. Greece gives you an underworld with structure and mythic consequence. Religious institutions over time can turn the afterlife into a threat machine. Different architecture, same human vulnerability, fear of death, and if you can control death, you can control life. Next episode, we close this arc by bringing the patterns together. Knowledge, resets, worship, scapegoats, sacrifice, afterlife fear. And then we ask the final question that's been hiding under every episode. When a god demands loyalty through fear, what exactly are we serving? Part 7 is the convergence, the pattern map, the exit sign. Because the goal isn't to leave you scared, the goal is to leave you awake.